31st of December, 1998. It's midsummer in the South Island city of Ashburton, New Zealand. A 15-year-old girl with blonde hair is seen walking her beloved Labrador cross on the hot summer afternoon by her neighbour. It's around 3 p.m. It will be the last time that Ashburton College student Kirsty Bentley is seen alive. A frantic search by her family, friends and police find no sign of Kirsty that night. The next morning, her dog is found near a river tied to a tree. Amongst the foliage is her underwear. But still, no sign of Kirsty. 17 days later, Kirsty's body is found 40 kilometres away in the Gorge. For over 2 decades, Kirsty's killer has not been caught, and the case remains one of New Zealand's most prolific unsolved crimes. Welcome back to Shadow Matter, where I take a look at the darker side of our world with a focus on stories and cases from Australia and New Zealand. This case is honestly very, very sad, and it gives me the shivers every time I've been doing research on it or I think about it. It has been requested numerous times in the last year, and I would like to thank subscriber and good mate of mine, Roland Royce Thompson, for suggesting this case. As a child in the 90s, I strangely remember this case for a few different reasons. Ashburton was not far away from where our family lived at the time, so when news broke, it was quite close to home. I also remember this being just a year after the Sounds murders of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope, another high-profile murder case. I thought that at the time, it kind of felt like every New Year's in New Zealand, there was some kind of tragedy. After Kirsty's body was found, our family went hiking in Canterbury somewhere, and I vividly remember seeing a pair of girls' underwear and some scrub, and my mind instantly thought of Kirsty and the case, and I thought something dark was happening, and yeah. That's just how I remember this. As stated before, the murder of 15-year-old Kirsty Bentley comes a year to the day after the murders of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope. It seems New Zealand was not the place to be during New Year's Eve in the late 90s. Kirsty Marianne Bentley was born on the 18th of January 1983. She was the second child of her parents, Jill and Sydney Bentley. She had an older brother, John, who was born in 1979. Kirsty was a typical teenage girl of the 90s. She adored boy bands such as the Backstreet Boys and New Kids on the Block, as well as some girl bands of the era such as the Spice Girls. She lined her bedroom wall with various posters of her teen idols and sang to her favourite songs. Described as confident and direct with the people she knew, Kirsty was also vibrant, honest, and compassionate. Her love of creativity led Kirsty to take up drama at school and was quite fond of poetry. Kirsty had a close group of friends and was also in the midst of a typical teenage romance with her boyfriend Graham. During the summer break over Christmas and New Year's 1998, Kirsty had been besotted with Graham and was finally allowed to have her young lover over for dinner with the family on December the 31st. Kirsty's mother Jill had allowed Graham to stay the night in Kirsty's bedroom. Kirsty's father Sid was not too pleased about this, but reluctantly agreed with his wife's decision. Kirsty was over the moon about her boyfriend coming over to the Bentley's red brick household on 165 South Street in Ashburton. So excited, she played Jill a song that she thought conveyed her feelings of love for Graham. Kirsty's older brother John was studying and living in Christchurch and was 2 years into his Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Canterbury. During the summer break, John would return home to Ashburton and work seasonal jobs. On the morning of December the 31st, he had already left for his berry picking job. Jill leaves the family home at around 9:30 a.m. for her job. Sid was still in bed but left to run some errands in Christchurch at about 11:15 a.m. Kirsty went into town with a friend and left the house at around 10:30 a.m. She and her friend meet at the Ashburton Library and later have lunch at McDonald's. John got home about midday to find only the dog home and answered a phone call from Graham at 1 p.m. According to John, Kirsty returned home at about 2:30 p.m. and he heard her in her bedroom. He told her about the call from Graham and retreated to his room to listen to music and watch TV. Phone records indicate that Kirsty called her boyfriend back, but he was not available, so she leaves a message. Kirsty then takes the family's black Labrador cross, Abby, for a walk, a usual pastime of hers. John emerges from his room in search of something to eat and notices that both Kirsty and Abby are gone. Kirsty would walk her normal route from the home to Robiliard Park along the banks of the Ashburton River. It was about 3 p.m. when Kirsty was witnessed by her 11-year-old neighbour Sarah Ward walking Abby along Chalmers Ave. Sarah waved out to her as she biked past Kirsty. She was wearing a black tank top with a white butterfly-patterned blue sarong and black Colorado shoes with white soles. At around 4:20 p.m, Kirsty's boyfriend Graham calls back and John answers. Kirsty is not home. John thinks this is a little unusual, as normally her walk would take less time. She should be home by now. By 5:15 p.m, Jill arrives back home from work and is greeted by an upset John. "Where the F is Kirsty?" he says to her. Jill almost immediately leaves the property to search for Kirsty along the river, as this was her usual route. Sid arrives back home just after 6 p.m, and Jill relays her fears to her husband. After some discussion, Sid calls the Ashburton police, where Jill returns to search for Kirsty. John had been out searching since 6 p.m. and eventually met Jill on the river track. Meanwhile, a local man informs Sid of hearing a dog barking, and Sid leaves with the man to check the riverbank. Sid, who said he had a migraine, vomited on the way. When Jill and John returned, police sent John back out on his bike to check another section of the track. Sid picked up John at about 8 p.m. and took him home. However, it wasn't long before John headed out again and joined groups of other searchers, including his uncle, until about 12:30 a.m. Police, family, friends, and other locals searched extensively along the Ashburton River long into the night and early into New Year's Day. They called out for Kirsty, they called out for Abby, but by 3 a.m., the searchers exhaustively retired. 8 a.m. on January the 1st, 1999, an official search and rescue operation was launched. They scoured the Ashburton riverbank, and just after 2 hours, they heard barking. A dehydrated Abby was found tied to a tree by a lead in an area of dense bush just off one of the walking tracks favoured by Kirsty. Now, this is odd because that area had been searched the night before. As stated, also a lot of people were calling for Abby. You would think that a dog would bark or alert people to its whereabouts if it was being called for. Another 2 hours later, Kirsty's underwear and boxer shorts are found in the bush just 30 meters away from where Abby was found. Again, nothing was found the night before, even though the area had been searched thoroughly. It is possible that the dog may have hunkered down. No one heard her barks because of the amount of people searching and making noise, calling out for both. Dark, the bush is dense, the dog and clothing could have been easily missed. Or the dog and clothing could have been staged, a point to bring up later. Over the next fortnight, as the hunt for Kirsty widened across Ashburton and the wider Canterbury district, rumours began swirling and fingers began to point. Hundreds of local men were spoken to by police. The Bentleys were moved into a motel on January the 6th, so police could seal the Bentley home and conduct a forensic search. Luminol testing was used, but nothing of any significance was found. Half a dozen sightings of Kirsty came forward in the next few days, some to differing degrees of appearance. However, none of these amounted to much. It was January the 17th, 1999, two cannabis growers John Watts and Brendan Wanhalla stumbled upon a body 50 kilometres from Ashburton in a plot of young pine trees in the Rikaya Gorge. The body was lying on a tarpaulin sheet. It was placed into a fetal position. The clothes on the body were a blank tank top, a blue sarong, and Colorado shoes. It was Kirsty Bentley, found dead just one day before her 16th birthday. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Her body was partially hidden with sticks and bracken, and the position of her body was noted as respectfully placed. She was missing her underwear, the same underwear found earlier. The advanced stage of decomposition meant forensics could not determine whether the attack was sexually motivated. Pathology results suggested a time of death between 3:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. on the day Kirsty went missing. Police also noted the unusual placement of her hair scrunchie on her wrist. Kirsty rarely left the house without her hair tied up. Detective Senior Sergeant Lance Corcoran, who led the original Ashburton CIB investigation, felt from day one that the crime scene was staged by the killer to throw police off his trail. His view would be endorsed a decade later by top international criminal profiler, retired British Police Inspector Chuck Burton, who reviewed the files in a bid to shed new light on the cold case. Quote, "It's an offender protecting his own identity by changing and altering the crime scene." End quote. There were no signs of the underwear having been torn or forcibly removed, and the Bentleys didn't think the lead was the same one Kirsty left home with. Nobody heard barking the night before either. There were no other clues down by the river. Over the next fortnight, as the hunt for Kirsty widened across Ashburton, hundreds of local men were spoken to by police. The investigation was widely publicised, and all of New Zealand's media outlets covered the story extensively. A hard focus was put on the small city of Ashburton, and many rumours began circulating. Given all the evidence, it was believed that whoever killed Kirsty was well known to her, and naturally, investigators looked closely at her brother and father. This narrative was also picked up by the media, which probably helped stimulate ideas into the public conscience. An initial inquiry team led by Detective John Winter was told to shift focus early on from missing person to homicide before Kirsty's body was found. His team focused seriously on Sid and John as suspects. A considerable amount of time was spent looking at family dynamics. Those dynamics did not add up to a particularly happy family. Sid Bentley was a hard-working and even harder-drinking Englishman from the industrial town of Workington in the north of England. He had spent time as an engineer in the Royal Navy. On one of his stops in Timaru, South Canterbury in 1973, he met Jill while on leave. They saw each other for a week before Sid's ship set sail again, so Jill was surprised to get a letter of proposal from Sid a short while later while he was stationed in Panama. They got married in South Canterbury in 1976 and later relocated to Ashburton to settle down with the family. Sid was described as a proud Englishman, stubborn and strict, but also a law-abiding citizen. He had morals. If someone has done something wrong, they should own up to it. Both John and Jill would numerously state that they believed Sid had nothing to do with Kirsty's death. John was looked at under suspicion too and said that, quote, "Sid was always super prideful and a bit overly principled. If he had anything to do with it, he'd have gone to the police immediately. If I had done it, he would have marched me right up to the police station and got me to confess, because that was the right thing to do. Also, Kirsty was his favourite. If he had hurt her in any way, he'd have not been able to hide it." End quote. The sentiments were not always shared by investigators, especially by Detective Superintendent Greg Williams, who took over Operation Kirsty after John Winter. His theory: John killed Kirsty and Sid covered up for him. Williams' narrative looks something like this. Sid arrived home shortly after 4 p.m. to find John had killed Kirsty, perhaps accidentally. Together, they bundled her body into a tarpaulin, put her into Sid's ute, and Sid drove to the Rakaia Gorge to carefully hide her body. John was left at home to deal with Jill, and Sid arrived back at about 6:15 p.m. Sid or John then planted Abby near the track. But what was the motive? An early theory by investigators was that John was jealous of Kirsty's new romance and ended her life in a crime of passion. Sid's changing alibi probably didn't help his case either. Originally, Sid had told police that he had driven to Christchurch to drop off a water blaster and get some tools on the day Kirsty vanished, after which he spent a couple of hours in Littleton before driving straight home. But police had possible sightings of him in Hotel Ashburton on the edge of town at about 4 p.m. A witness said a man with an English accent who matched Sid's description was in the queue in front of him buying cigarettes. A till receipt seemed to corroborate the account. There were also numerous sightings of cars similar to Sid's distinctive Holden Kingswood ute. One was from a woman who was pulling out of a petrol station in Methven between Ashburton to the Rakaia Gorge and knew her cars. That put the Holden in the gorge area around 5 p.m. Sid later called the woman, but she refused to talk to him. Sid's story later changed in 2000. He claimed he hit his head on a cupboard. The new version of events had him coming back from Christchurch about 2:30 p.m. He was within 30 seconds of his home when he decided to drive to Wakanui Beach to get over a migraine, he said. Confusingly, Sid retracted his change of story when spoken to again by police not long before his death in 2015. Both Jill and John are unsure as to why he lied about his story. They presume his prideful ego got in the way. Perhaps he was doing something he felt was unsavory. Was he having an affair? We may never know. Jill quotes, "I can only wonder if he was doing something he wouldn't have wanted to be publicly aired. Again, a very proud Englishman. He took his secret to the grave. It doesn't fit the timing, and I couldn't imagine him hurting Kirsty." End quote. Police are certain of Sid's whereabouts from early morning to 2:30 p.m., and then again after he returned home at 6 p.m. The hours in between, however, are unknown. Jill and Sid separated not long after he changed his story in 2000, but Jill states the divorce was not because of this. She says she had come to loathe the alcoholic she was living with. John later moved overseas and was left nothing by his father when he passed away. Even the house was gifted to a church in Sid's will. Other sightings may lead to more answers, such as a rare green 1961 commer van sighted in Ashburton, but also sightings placed it in the Camp Gully area of Rakaia Gorge. Police asked publicly for any information on this van, believing it may have had something to do with the murder. Commer vans like this were mainly used by tourists and drifters and was looked at by police as a possible lead to a suspect in Kirsty's death. A mechanic came forward with details of the van's registration number, EP9888, who worked on the van and noted it down due to its distinct style and rarity. Its registration was cancelled in 1995, and it's believed that only 2 of these vans ever existed in New Zealand. Despite thousands of hours of police work, the vehicle and its owner remain unknown. Early suspects include farm worker Barry Hepburn, then 52, now deceased, who was known to walk his Alsatian dog along the river trail and was seen in the area. He had the mental age of a young teen. He didn't show up for work on New Year's Day, and when he was seen next, he was uncharacteristically washed and clean-shaven. Rakaia resident Charlie Smith, who repainted his Ford Falcon car after the disappearance and was said to have boasted of a role in Kirsty's death, was also looked at closely. Another later line of suspects include Ashburton killer Russell John Tully, who murdered 2 work and income staff members in Ashburton in 2014, and he was known to camp in the area of Ashburton. Although Tully has denied any involvement and police excluded him from potential suspects after he was found to be living in Nelson at the time of the murder. Waimati loner Jason Frandy, who killed 2 hitchhikers and then himself in a forest, was suspected, then ruled out. Operation Kirsty is now led by Detective Inspector Greg Merton, who officially ruled out Kirsty's father and brother as suspects. Theories range from someone Kirsty knew to a random opportunist. His primary theory was Kirsty was abducted and killed by a stranger who lived locally, either smoked or grew cannabis, and knew the Rakaia Gorge area. DNA testing has come a long way, and Merton shared with media in 2018 that new DNA evidence could lead to a breakthrough in the case. He also shared that the operation was looking closely at suspects and is still ongoing, and police have evidence that hasn't been made public that would indicate who the type of offender is in this case. He believes a piece of information from, quote, the right person could solve the murder. In 2022, a $100,000 reward was offered for any information or evidence leading to the identification and conviction of the person or people responsible for Kirsty Bentley's death. Over 700 mourners attended the funeral of Kirsty Marianne Bentley on January the 25th, 1999 at Ashburton's St. Stephen's Anglican Church. Friends and family said their farewells to the innocent girl who adored boy bands, Winnie the Pooh, her close friends, her family, and her boyfriend. She will remain young forever in the minds of many. Rest in peace, Kirsty. As of the date of filming this, the murder remains unsolved. The cold case file amounts to more than 70 archive boxes containing 400 folders of documents and evidence. If you are watching this and you have any information related to this case or any of the others I have spoken about, please contact police on 105 and reference Operation Kirsty, or call Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111. It's quite a sad story, and I can honestly relate to the family of Kirsty. Never knowing who did this and never getting that sense of justice, it's honestly terrible, and my heart goes out to them. It really does. Thanks for coming to hang out in the shadows once again. If you prefer to listen rather than watch, feel free to look me up on Spotify. Like, comment, subscribe, and ding that bell, and I'll see you next time in the shadows.